Katsuki.
Hi, this is Anya. And this is
What's Your Takeaway?
What's Your Takeaway is an exploration of ideas, insights, and inspiration. It is your food for thought.
And here we peel the onion and unravel the beauty and importance of introspection. Hi, gang.
Hello. What a special episode.
What a special episode. We even have a different setup now.
I know. Change things up a bit.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so
episode 6.
6 to the honors.
Is it really?
7? We always lose track.
It's 6.
Okay,
it's
6.
Yes,
correct, 6.
yes. So it's a very special episode because a good friend of mine is here. And honestly, we don't like doing the whole credential thing. So we're asking you to introduce yourself.
Great.
Would that be okay?
Sure. I'm Lawrence Ypil. I'm a writer from Cebu. I currently teach poetry and creative writing in Singapore. And Katsuki mentioned that this would be a good time to sit down and talk.
Sit down and talk, yes.
And I'm here for that.
Yes.
We always sit down and talk anyway, but this is different.
I've always been intrigued by you because every time I catch up with Katsuki, she always has a lot to share about your insights.
And our crazy
and your
conversations.
Crazy conversations with Tita Brianna's presence. So we felt the need to, kind of expand the space and share your thoughts in this podcast. So we usually begin our conversation, Lara, by understanding kind of the context of your practice of introspection, by wanting to know how did it originate from your childhood?
Or did it?
Or
like
did
when
it?
did you start to practice or be aware of your reflections or whatever?
Yeah. Wow. It's a huge question. I love the question.
It's like boom.
We don't do small talk here. All big talk.
My instinctive answer is to think about playing the piano when I was growing up. So I was one of those kids that had piano lessons by choice. Actually, this wasn't a forced thing. I was grade 1 and 2. Some classmates I knew took piano lessons. I felt it was something I was interested to do, so I got really into it. My parents found out I was kind of obsessed with it, so piano lessons started. And in many ways, I was the kid who played piano. So in parties, the kid that was asked to perform. I bring up the piano because, wow, I'm thinking I no longer play it. But when I think back about those spaces in which I could hear myself or where I felt I was in a space where I could be myself, it was at the piano. I wasn't exactly a genius at it, but I loved structure and patterns. I loved how you could play things fast on it. And I'm really remembering how being in that space in a weird way is both very conscious because you're playing for your mom and your dad and the guests in the house.
Yeah.
But it was a space where I did not need to talk. And yet I was heard.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm not answering your question.
No, you are.
But there's something, it's interesting to me. It's what came across my mind today. Kay, maybe introspection is also that space where we can hear ourselves,
Yeah.
but where we can also be heard.
Yeah.
I feel like my second answer to the question has to do with growing up queer. And when you grow up queer, there's a really sharp divide between what you know about yourself and what other people see in you. And to a queer child, that is part of what it means to grow up, understanding that there are things in you, there are parts of you that for whatever reason, depending on the context, you might need to hide and keep to yourself.
Right.
So, so when you ask me about introspection, I can't help but also think about my queer experience of that, and especially queer children who are in a way forced to have a very deep sense of self.
True.
Okay, it comes from a certain sense of difference. I'm different.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a name for it yet, but I'm different.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unya, and you grow up feeling that, if I express this difference, it might get complicated. Some people might not like it. So you really become hesitant about what you're willing to share. But you also become very, I don't know, it becomes clear to you who your friends are. Because they're the ones you're willing to share that with. So introspection, I think for me, is coming from, I guess, a deep sense of art through my piano, but also a deep and meaningful experience of growing up queer,
Yeah.
and what it means to grow up queer.
Yeah. I love that imagery of you playing the piano in parties and how you're not really able to talk, but you're very much heard and they feel your presence. And in the same manner, you connected that to you growing up queer and how, you know that you're different, but you're really unsure how to express that or how to articulate that. Because you're still also, I guess, figuring out the how. In that sort of journey as a child, embracing your queerness and also connecting to music as a form of letting yourself be known. What were the discoveries you had in mind? Like what were the thoughts, or in your exploration, what were the thoughts that kind of surfaced? Like how did you discover yourself in that process, in those years of you slowly exploring who you are?
Yeah. I think with the music part, I feel like part of the gift of music is the capacity to find a form to our feeling.
That's beautiful.
And that there is a way to give structure to feeling, and that feelings are beautiful if you find a way to give them form.
Yeah.
I feel like that's always been, growing up, that was the virtue of music for me. And then when a lot of these feelings are unnamed, bitaw, finding a form, a structure, a practice of feeling through the piano, I think really helped. And I suspect that's why I eventually became a writer also. And I suspect that's why I got drawn to poetry.
Yeah.
Because poetry, I think, among all the genres, is the genre that loves structure
Right.
and form.
Yeah.
It's something that I bring up with students, like because like a lot of students go to poetry because we have feelings to express. And sometimes when to the beginning writer, just because you have feelings doesn't mean you're a writer. Right? So like there are students with a lot of feeling.
Yeah.
And then they think that just because they have a lot of feeling, that automatically translates to good poetry.
Right.
So for those people, what I like to do is to really teach them the virtues of form and structure.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a way of naming the feeling.
Right.
Right.
I emphasize the fact that poetry isn't interested in fixing a feeling or necessarily remedying a bad feeling. It allows us to name it.
Yeah.
Right.
It gives us structure.
Yeah.
Maybe the healing will come after.
Yeah.
So as a poetry teacher, I like to say it's not my job to heal you, but I will help you name it.
Yes.
And I will help you give form to your feeling. And then in that process, you will have a way to heal. The other problem is people who have all form but no feeling.
Yeah, very disconnected also.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so the teaching challenge there is different,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they have an automatic knack for pattern
Right,
and rhythm and music.
And then
Yeah.
they don't do the soul part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or they
Yeah.
don't have much to share yet.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so they need to have their heart broken maybe a bit, or they
Aw.
need to grow up a bit.
Right.
To get
That's
the
true.
feeling
to
in
get
there.
The,
To
to
get
get
the
the soul in
feeling.
there.
One isn't complete without the other.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah, they
yes.
should go together.
Yeah.
I like the part that about the form and the structure. I mean, someone in one of the many podcasts that I'm listening to, it's part of being an artist is discipline, and it's really appreciating the form and the structure. It's not all about just putting it out there without
Yeah.
these parameters too. A lot of people would say, no, because we're abstract, we don't follow rules. But I don't know. I like
Yeah.
what he's saying. I want to be
Yeah.
your student.
I really the poet in you is, I mean, we are learners here. That's why we're doing this podcast to learn from our guests. But the poet in you really is surfacing out from this conversation.
Yeah.
And what
It always
s-
does.
It always does, because that's who he is.
Yeah.
But there's so much eloquence in what you said, which I really appreciated. And you've put so much emphasis on not just the existence of feeling, but also the importance of form and structure. But I think I want to draw out what you said about the form and the structure helps you identify or label feelings. And I want to delve deep into that, like how important that is for you. Because I think a lot of people are afraid to feel, yet alone label what they feel.
Yeah. Agree.
So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that, and how important is that for you, given that you work in a manner where form and structure is important, so I'm able to identify or understand what I'm feeling?
And I think it goes, it can be applied beyond writing or art even. I
It is.
think I'm thinking about how structure and form are important aspects of what you're asking, introspection. For
Yeah.
other people, it's maybe the word practice is what's important to think about. The idea of practicing introspection, finding the space to name things, to recognize things about ourselves, building that kind of practice that allows us to hear things from ourselves that are usually drowned out when we're distracted. In my case, it's been writing. That's been really important in carving
So,
out that space.
When you have a feeling that arises, writing is your tool to help you identify and kind of suss it out.
I think so.
That's why he journals.
Yes.
Yeah. I love sentences.
Yes.
I love breaking sentences. So I really encourage students and writers to carve out writing time. So if it's in a classroom setup, then it's a bit more regimented. So I really say, like, try to write a few minutes a day. There's this ritual called morning pages that comes from, I think, Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. And she suggests that every morning at the start of the day, first thing you do when you wake up is to write by hand
Yeah.
3 pages. Kunya, don't worry about what you have to say. It's the practice of moving the hand and the
Freeform.
finger
Right.
over the page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to let things out. I don't always practice it, but in those moments when I need to make a major decision or I'm a bit confused
here.
about where to go in life, I find myself returning to that practice. And it's very liberating for me because I love, well, for one, it feels like going to the bathroom in the morning. You let things out.
Yeah,
In the
purging again.
morning.
Yeah.
You purge,
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
And this time on the page.
Yes.
But what I noticed there, it doesn't matter actually. I don't really go back to what I wrote in the morning. What I notice is that my mind, after doing that in the morning, is a bit hungry for images. And it's a bit hungry for more words as it goes through the day. So it almost feels like I flush things out and I'm left wanting and and looking.
You're
Right.
now an empty cup. So
Right?
you're not, yeah.
And in those spaces, morag, the world is starker. I feel like
It's like a reset in
it's
your
totally
lens.
like
Yeah.
a reset. So that's been, that's been a kind of introspective practice that I've tried doing. I like suggesting. Yeah. Sometimes poems come out of it. Most of the time, it's just
Yeah.
crap, to be honest.
Sometimes you call it downloads.
Sometimes it's called a download,
Yeah.
and you have no idea who's talking already
Yeah.
on the page.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you're really saying the same thing over and over again.
Right.
Yeah.
Like my journals from 10 years ago, same issues.
yeah. Yeah.
So on one hand, I'm just like, wow, I really haven't improved.
I was
Like-
gonna ask that, like, so what's the conclusion if it's the same thing over and over?
But I think it's, like I said, it's the practice.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the poems get written later in the day.
The intention isn't really to come up with something, but just to kind of release.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you talk, there's a lot of imagery in the way you articulate yourself, and I guess that's the poet in you, which I super appreciate. How does it play a part in your poetry, in your day-to-day life, and in your introspection? Like when you're purging out words and emotions and feelings on paper in your morning pages, I'm definite that there's a lot of imagery there. And how does this, impact you?
Yeah. I've always felt images are wiser than us. Especially when we're trying to name something that's difficult to name, or even express a feeling that we can hardly even put a name to. And sometimes we have feelings that there's just no name for that. Like it hasn't just been invented.
Yeah.
True.
Right? It's like feelings in between feelings. It's like
Yeah.
angry, but kind of okay also.
Yeah.
Like what do you name that? Or like desire, but like mixed with ickiness.
Yes.
Like, we've all felt those in between feelings, and then we feel like we need to invent a word for them. I've found that images are one way to name those. There's a wonderful specificity to images. Like I don't know how I'm feeling, but
It looks like this.
It looks like
Yeah.
a bag against a white wall.
Yeah.
Or an electric socket that's kind of in tatters.
Yeah.
Or a ray of light that hits, like a field of grass.
Wow.
And you're like,
It's a poem already there.
Yeah.
and you're like, what does that mean? And I don't know what that means, but there's something in an image that captures our state of being, if you will. And your body can tell,
Yeah.
when an image is like real. I think our tendency is to go to stock images,
Right.
Yes.
right? And that's where we think we're naming the feeling, but actually we're like naming someone else's feeling, right? When we think that peace is a white dove.
Yes. You kind of stereotype it.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like peace is other things too.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
So part of the thrill for me, and when I love your question on images, it's like like I said, also a space in which you might begin to name. And sometimes you don't end up with a new name. You stay with the image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you describe it sometimes when when you're talking to people, for you to be understood, you just murag kini ba? Murag
Yeah.
kana ba? So yeah, it's better in Bisaya, but yeah, you know what I mean.
The
Yeah.
metaphors really allow us to, I guess, have a deeper understanding of that feeling, not trapped to a single word.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you're describing that, images also elicit different feelings to different people. If
Yeah.
to some, like a dove could be peace, but for who knows, a dove could also be like a pest to someone. Or,
Yeah.
Yes.
it could mean different things to different
That's
people.
true. Yeah.
I'm just curious about like your art and your profession and in your poetry. What is the process behind it? Like, how do you practice um, introspection in your creative process when you express yourself in words?
Um, I begin with a line. Um, I'm not the type to begin with a plan or knowing automatically what I wish to say. Poetry for me begins with a really, really good, snappy line.
Nice.
So I think I go back to my musical roots in a
Yeah,
way.
because there's a
Like,
rhythm to it.
there's
Yeah.
a rhythm to it.
Yeah.
It just sounds good.
Yeah.
And you have no idea what it means yet,
Yeah.
but it really sounds good.
Would you say that it's a stream of consciousness thing for you when you do your poetry?
Yes.
Starting with a snappy line.
Yes. I do wait for the good line, but then once there's a good line that falls right and
It
feels
right
right
in your mouth.
yes, and it feels like it has more to say, that's the signal to me that there could be a poem. So what I usually do is I see where that line goes.
A line that could be extracted into so many variations.
Yes.
Wow.
And I give it a go. So
Yeah.
I'm not a marathon runner. I'm a sprinter, if you will. So once I'm in that zone,
Boom.
Boom.
boom. I
Boom.
go, I see where it goes. It might not lead to anywhere, but like I give it a go. And many, like I said, many times it doesn't really lead to good writing, but you're building a space already. And then I begin there.
Yeah.
After that, what I usually do is do that by hand, and then I'll transfer it on the screen, and then I type things out there. The screen is, so I don't know if you want me to get technical, but I love cutting lines.
You mentioned it earlier, breaking sentences.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I really feel like that's where it is. Poetry is where the sentence breaks. Poetry is where a sentence cannot complete itself.
I love that.
Poetry is where you turn the line. And on a computer screen or laptop or your phone, that's where like line cut become really important to me, because you can play around with the sequence of words. You can, cut the line at different spaces. And that's where I feel the internal shape of the poem begins to come out.
Wow.
I don't do rhymes. I don't do fixed form. I'm kind of a
Yes.
free verse writer.
Yeah.
So very important to the free verse writer, I think, is the line. Poetry is where you cut it. Right? So where you cut a thought, where you cut a feeling, where you say stop, move, twist,
Yeah.
turn. That's where poetry is for me. So in a way that's I don't know if that's too technical, but that's kind of my process.
Yeah.
And then I set it aside and hope it and wish it luck.
You let it sit there, brew, do it,
I
sing.
like, okay, maybe I'll go back to you when there's a deadline to submit, or maybe if I'm working on a book, I'll go back to you. But I do let it go.
Do you condition yourself or design your environment? Are you a ritualistic person when you come up with art? Like, is there something that you have to prepare for before you come up with a writing?
Yeah.
Or yeah?
Yeah,
What
I mean,
is-
I like writing in cafes.
Yeah.
I really write. I need a kind of background noise. I have a hard time staying in a room quiet because I have too many thoughts,
Yeah.
man. Like
Oh yeah.
too many thoughts.
many, yep.
And like a quiet room, while very conducive for other people,
It could be
oh my
overwhelming.
gosh, you know. So there is a pleasure that I feel in a crowd of strangers.
Right.
Yeah.
There is something about cafes, whether in Cebu or wherever I am,
Yes.
I find that that's where I can begin to think.
Comforting.
The background noise of strangers are what I write against and I
Wow.
write
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
I call it also the intimacy of strangers.
Yeah.
Which is part of, I think, the power of writing. Speaking of introspection, because I think You're making me think. Like in introspection, we mostly think, oh, go into your room and then like, make
Yeah.
maot and then make
Yeah.
maoy and then like feel and then come out
Or you
refreshed.
have to be in solitude.
Yes, and I've noticed that sometimes the kind of introspection that is productive for me happens when I'm in a crowd in a public place where no one knows me and I don't know them. But there is a kind of company that strangers can give.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that's part of the pleasure of living in a city
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you can find spaces where you are unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just gonna say this brings me back to the image you painted in the beginning where you were playing the piano in parties and in crowds, like how you're able to actually connect to yourself through playing the piano, and yet you're in a crowd, you're performing. So I feel like there's probably some parallelism to that. But before I forget, I was gonna pick on what you said earlier because it's fascinating to me how you emphasize so much on form and structure, and yet you were talking about breaking sentences and just allowing things to flow and putting it out there and just connecting everything and letting it just kind of be messy and then letting it brew after that. Like, how does that kind of align? Like, what is the starting point of when the form and structure applies?
Yeah. I think the best way to know structure is by breaking it. And knowing where, I mean, for me with poetry, it's really a form because it's cut into lines, right? It's for me, it's really a form that is attempting to run across or against the sentence. What do I mean by that? Like sentences are complete thoughts. The man went to the market is a thought. Poetry is the form where we're allowed maybe to say the man went, cut, pause, to the market. Or the man went to, cut, pause, the market. And for whatever reason, those cuts are different. And it's, I think, in those ways of cutting that I begin to get a sense of structure or form. So I guess when I say structure or form, I'm not thinking of a kind of, how you're baking, there's like a
Recipe.
there's like a recipe, or there's like a what do you call it? Like it's where you put the dough, or it's where you like the form of the cookie, right?
The mold.
The mold, yeah.
Right. So I think other people like working with molds.
Yeah.
I think when I talk about structure, I'm not so much thinking about the mold, but I'm thinking about maybe the knife as it cuts through the meat. So there is mess involved. I think when we say structure, it doesn't mean it's always clean.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
And to go back on these questions of introspection, I think we're made to think that the space where we have to build is this like pristine, clean, clear space of the self where everything is named and we're sure about everything. And then that's not. For me, in my experience, that is not the space of introspection. Introspection is messy. It's alive.
Yep.
It's creative. It deals with making something new, I feel. So I think I'm running against certain notions of introspection where like, oh, you have to meditate, you have to be quiet, you have to be like super fit, like you have to have abs. Like we have these like...
Or a certain discipline.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you have to be super disciplined.
Yeah.
And like, no.
Yeah, no.
I think there's space to think of the mess that is necessary for real introspection.
Yeah, I actually feel it's messy.
It's very messy.
Very messy.
Like when we journal, it's very messy and like disorganized. And you can tell like, oh my God, my disorders are on here. So yeah, I think I agree with you. And yeah.
And it's also sitting in that mess.
Yeah.
Right? Like how are you able to sit in that mess despite how disorganized everything is, or
Yeah.
and also a lot of people desire to find clarity right away. But it's not something that happens. I want to transition our conversation to you as a teacher, because I feel like I'm always fascinated and I have so much respect for teachers, because I feel like within the four walls of the classroom is already a huge platform for reflection and introspection, but that's also something you take on outside the classroom and in your way of being and the way you live. I remember one of my professors in university, he was a cancer survivor, and after probably 3 decades of practice, he decided to become a teacher after he survived cancer. And he said, I'm teaching now because this is a way for me to immortalize myself. And I thought that was beautiful. And I wanted to ask you what led you to teaching and what joy it gives you.
Um, I ended up teaching. Wow, when I quit medical school, so I went through a kind of very typical, maybe achiever story of you need to be lawyer, doctor, engineer, right? So my story was you need to be doctor. So I went into pre-med. I went into years of medical school. Actually, I was very close to completing med school, and then I did not finish it. I left to become a poet, for lack of a better or word. And I found myself, in this country, one of the ways one can continue to nurture poetry is through teaching. So I ended up teaching, and I thought I'll need to find out if I like teaching, if I'm to continue writing, right? So my first taught in Ateneo in Manila. That's where I found my first few experiences of teaching. I've since taught briefly in the States, and then now I'm teaching in Singapore. As a teacher of poetry and creative writing, I feel like it's my chance to give space to students to discover themselves in a way that I was not always given
Yeah.
as a student.
Right.
I think that's really what helps shape my pedagogy. The teaching of creative writing is I think such a difficult task because it isn't. There are no rules. There are no fixed rules for it. There are no like 10 ways to write a poem and then you'll be made. It's a process of letting students discover their own voice.
Yeah.
And how do you do that, right?
Yeah.
And part of the way you do that is that you give them space to try things out
Yeah.
and be themselves. And I feel like the most successful semesters are when, out of like the 15 students that are sending in poems, they all sound different from each other.
Right.
Amazing.
That's when I know I might have done a good job.
Right.
Some of them will be better than others,
Yeah.
right? But that's almost like beside the point,
Yeah.
right? There will
Yeah.
always be people better than others in
That's true.
all art forms.
Yeah.
But I think the most that we can do is to speak and write as closest to ourselves as we can.
That's beautiful.
And that's what I really hope to do as a teacher, to provide the space, the encouragement, but also like the really frank criticism
Yeah.
that we all need to hear. So I'm not one to like, just because you're like a really diligent student, because there are really diligent students. But then when it comes to the poem,
It doesn't come
just
out.
needs more work, you
Yeah.
know. And you're like, okay, do I tell the student the truth or at least part of the truth? And I try to tell part of the truth, right? I try
Gently.
to tell them it's an improvement, but like I still need you to like get rid of those bad habits of sounding like, the last poet you read. So
Wow.
Amazing.
You talked about like your pedagogy being wanting to provide your students spaces of self-discovery, because something that we did not have, I guess, our generation, and the way, education was facilitated,
Mm-hmm.
didn't really nurture that parts of us. And that's also why we want to create this space, as a safe platform for people to kind of help them discover who they are. I'm wondering, from that queer kid who was exploring and figuring out how he's able to best express and represent himself, how are you able to provide yourself that safe space for discovery, to who you are now? And what did you discover?
Um, I I feel it's important to find people
Hmm.
where one can be oneself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not something you can do on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it takes a town, it takes a
Takes a village.
community, right? It takes a
Yeah. It
village
takes a village, yeah.
to know oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the challenge is finding people who will help you out along the way.
Yeah.
Um, and not necessarily always in a kind of always good way, right? I think there is also much to be learned by conflict.
Yes, agree.
There is much to be learned when we encounter people that run counter to what we believe in. When there's confrontation, when there's conflict,
Yeah.
right? I've learned much from picking up fights I shouldn't have picked. um, because they make me realize where I stand.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they change my mind.
Yes.
But I think again it's not to be afraid of engagement as we are, thinking what we're thinking and finding out where we stand for. There's a necessary part of the process that involves possibly meeting people that we don't exactly agree with. Um, and it's very easy to think that we must avoid that because that will disturb the peace. That will not lead to mess. I won't get abs from fighting.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's part of the mess of discovering something. It's potential conflict. It's tears. It's anger. It's the necessity of anger. It's the virtue of anger. And when we live in a world and a time where there is much to be angry about, there's a necessary space for that.
Yeah.
And that too is part of the process of moving into and out of ourselves. Right?
Yeah. And they say, like, the process of self-discovery is a lifelong thing. And everything that you have shared about the necessity of anger, the value of conflict, it all takes a lot of courage. What makes you brave?
I think it comes from my trust that what is true will come out. Trust that truth will come out. I trust in the value of truth. I trust in truth telling. But I also trust that truth will always find a way to come out. Even if it takes time. Truth isn't instant. Truth takes time too.
Yeah.
And we kind of need to be there when it does come out.
Yeah.
So I don't think the courage comes from any sense of like bravery or like isug.
Right.
The courage might come from trusting that this process is the process that will let the truth be told.
I like that. I like that. The courage in trusting. Okay.
Wow, yeah,
that's big.
I think the conversation throughout the
Yeah.
several episodes have really
Yeah, like
kind of challenged our way of thinking in a manner also that fills us up
yeah.
more.
But this
Um,
this one's big. This is heavy. Yeah. So like, you know, with all of your stories and with all of your experiences and all of your mess, what is your so far the result of all your journaling and all your writing and all your books? What is your biggest takeaway in life so far?
Um, that you can do the work, whether that be the work of writing or the work of teaching or the work of engagement.
mm,
Um, but the real work begins when you give it away.
Again, say that again.
You can write the good poem.
Right?
You can be super talented and write the most amazing poem,
Mm-hmm.
but it will not work its magic until you show it to someone
Right.
and you share it.
Mm,
So you can do the good work, but it doesn't begin until you begin to give it.
yeah.
I'm kind of surprised I've kind of returned to this point in our conversation the whole afternoon. It's like introspection needing engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is a need to go in,
Mm-hmm.
but that will not matter until you begin to bring that out.
Yeah. Whoa.
And my gosh, that's hard.
Yeah.
They're both hard.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The work of going in is hard,
Mm,
but then I think it should not stop there.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Right? It's the sharing where things can get
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So you can write the best poem, but it won't do its magic until you like share that poem
Yeah.
to a friend or a stranger.
So true.
Yeah.
I love that.
Boom. So
Boom.
powerful. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, maybe we aspire to self-actualize. I read somewhere that doesn't also, you're not able to achieve that unless you're able to share that to community.
Yeah.
In Zen Buddhism, it's the same. It's the need for sangha, a community. And I totally resonate with your takeaway because
And it's a back and forth process, I
That's
think. Right?
Yeah.
It's not like you go in and then you perfect yourself, you name all you need to name, you're set for life, and then you decide to go out. No, I think it's a movement, it's a pendulum between like checking in, if you will, and then going out and
Yeah.
giving it. I think I like the idea of the phrase giving it. You
Yeah.
give it.
Yeah.
Both as a generous gesture, but
Yeah.
also as like a kind of hit, like you give it to someone.
Yeah.
And I think that it's the moving back and forth between the giving it and then you go back again.
It's really a process, a never-ending process. So what's your takeaway so far?
Of everything
this.
that Larry shared today, my biggest takeaway would be I love the imagery you set out when you were describing the process of writing a poem. How you do not really focus on the mold, but the knife. And it's in the power of those in-betweens and in the magic of you slicing the sentences and breaking it apart in the pauses that you're able to give, that you're able to share. You don't keep it within you or you don't keep it within the rigidity of a sentence, but you break it and you slice it. And for me, I feel like in the manner of you slicing it up, that's when you wholeheartedly break yourself and the poetry into pieces, ready to be given away and shared. And I think in life, it's the same. For me personally, I feel like it's in those in-betweens, it's in those pauses that I'm also able to rejuvenate myself in order for me to be able to give back. So that's my takeaway.
Nice. I'm glad that you said something about the knife because that was also mine. Like, oh, the knife. Okay, the imagery. Because when I create music, it's kind of like construction. You build, you build, you build, and the beauty about it is when you eliminate
Mm.
and you make it simple. You eliminate. You build so much, and then you eliminate. You delete this track. Delete this. This is too much, and then there is a feeling of relief when you do that. So that's why I also like really resonated on the knife thing. Good job, Lar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
What an episode.
What an episode.
Was this what you expected?
No, I was gonna ask if this was what you expected.
Honestly, I was like, are we gonna touch about astrology?
Yeah, I was actually leading to that.
Is there still time for astrology, or is that maybe another episode?
We can
That
do
should
a
be
part
another
two.
episode.
I wanted to ask how your practice of introspection and your writing process led you to the intricacies of human design. I wanted to touch on that too.
Is there time for that, or that?
No, I don't think so. That's another.
I would gladly talk about it in another episode.
I know.
We can.
We would love to have you
Yeah.
again.
Yes, we will. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Definitely.
today it was because we wanted to also get to know you as a writer, as poet, and as a professor.
And I really want to thank you for inviting me and to invite me into this space
We love having you
of
here.
this conversation.
You were just number one on the list. So yeah.
yeah.
And I had no idea what you would be asking me today, and
Which was the whole point.
I
by
too
the
am
way.
surprised where we ended up.
Yeah.
But I think it's engagement that's obviously has been on my mind. I think especially I've been feeling it most strongly. I think with the massacres in Gaza that have been happening since last month, since 2 months almost, and we've been receiving images of that war in our phones, and I think we are all just trying to find a way to engage with it, even as we are faced with the helplessness that we feel as we are receiving those images.
Yeah.
So we are living in a world where we do have access to knowing these things, but it isn't always clear if we have any capacity to engage.
Yeah.
And I suspect that's why the word engage has been on my mind, because I think we have built spaces, even social media, spaces of deep we live in vacuums of engagement. And I think times like these are when we are tested to go beyond those very comfortable spaces.
Bubbles, yeah.
And I don't know. I have no idea. But we must, in our own ways. And I think that's the poem we all kind of need to write
Yeah.
at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The poem that will cut through all of this and allow us to tell the truth.
Yeah, beautiful. Yes, a lot of things that are happening in the world doesn't make sense, and I think the reason why we wanted to, create this community is so we're also able to nurture and have enabling environments for conversations that are necessary.
Yeah. Storytelling.
That care and that nurture compassion and safety.
Yeah.
So thank you for your
Thank
energy
you. Thank
and
you
your
for
presence
sharing this
today.
space with us.
Lara.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have you on our next season.
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
All right.
that's it for
See you on our next episode.
6. Until the next time, thank you so much.
Once again, this is your
What's Your Takeaway?
Bye.
Bye.